All right, ladies and gentlemen, now we're going to look at the next Near Eastern civilization in antiquity. This is the Phoenician Empire. A very different type of empire than we saw with the Assyrians. This is going to be a Mediterranean style empire of commerce, of trade, and therefore we're going to see a number of cultural influences that will impact the Phoenicians, and they will have a number of cultural artistic, trade, intellectual, technological influences throughout the world in which they come in contact. The Phoenicians were Canaanite people from the Levant, that region along the coast of the eastern Mediterranean that we've encountered already. They were referred to by the Greeks as the Phoenices, the red or purple people, and that was because they were traders in a very important purple dye that they harvested from marine animals near their homeland. And it was very costly to produce, as it required the near wholesale slaughter of this small, I think it was like sort of like a slug, and so therefore it was quite costly to make, and therefore purple, this red purple color, became became the sign associated mostly with aristocracy, nobility, royalty, and so forth, as it still is today. They were organized into a number of city-states on the Levant coastline: Byblos, Berytus, modern-day Beirut, Sidon and Tyre being two of the more famous ones as well. Byblos was famous for its paper making and the way in which it arranged those papers into what are called books, or biblos, Bibles, literally. Okay. But these were all city-states that were loosely allied with one another by common cultural traits. Okay. They traded on land and at sea in important resources. And we see a list here: wine, spices, salted fish, cedar from nearby, from the mountain ranges nearby, incense that they could acquire from down further in the Arabian Peninsula. Textiles, ivory, glass, dye was also quite important to them, as I mentioned a moment ago, and some precious metals from the Mesopotamian empires to their east. Okay. They also developed an alphabet, the Phoenician alphabet. We know that when we learn to read with our alphabet, that we read by sounding out the sounds. We call that phonics or phonetics. And that word is directly derived from the word Phoenician, because they developed a form of writing in which the symbol, whatever it is, represents a particular sound. And there were 20 odd sounds in the Phoenician alphabet, and there are 26 sounds in the English language alphabet. This would eventually be adopted by the Greeks, who gave it the term the alpha beta, standing for the first two letters of the Greek alphabet, and thus the word that we have today. So they're very, very influential in terms of creating a record of this sound system that we have in the West in terms of language. They also, as I made mention a moment ago, were developers of paper in the city of Byblos, and paper will take a long, long time to gain widespread use. Parchment and vellum, sheepskin, calfskin would be used more often in antiquity and the Middle Ages than paper would be. But paper would become absolutely essential once we switch over to the world of the printing press around the year 1400. Ink does not soak into parchment or vellum, but it does soak into paper. A printing press would only smear an image on vellum or parchment, and therefore paper is necessary to make printed words possible. And of course, we live in the days in which the printed word is becoming is on its decline in favor of the digital word. Nevertheless, one of the most important cities, Tyre, became the most prominent of all the Phoenician city-states. And it was strategically very important because it was located on a small island off the coast of Levant, which made it safe from attack from any very powerful land-based empire like the Assyrians or the Babylonians before them or the Egyptians or the Hittites. And since they had such a powerful navy, no one could really access the island, making the city-state itself virtually impregnable. And so while the Assyrians and all those other peoples could dominate the mainland, which was a problem for the city of Tyre because they were cut off from their agricultural land, they had their maritime empire that could provide them with a food supply that they could trade for, and therefore they would be able to fight back rather effectively. And so therefore, again, their major strength lay in their navy, as opposed to the Assyrians, whose major strength lay in their land army. We see here a map of the spread of the Phoenician city-states all the way to the western end of the Mediterranean. As a matter of fact, most of their city-states were established in the furthest reaches of the Mediterranean. We will begin to see in later history how the Greeks begin to spread out, especially in this area, and to some extent in northern Spain and through here as well. And there will be and on the island of Sicily, for instance. So there will be this rivalry between the city-states that are established by the Greeks and the city-states that are established by the Phoenicians. Okay. They really did develop a confederation style of imperial rule. It was not highly centralized, nothing like the power of the Assyrian monarchy. They were loosely allied with each other. They could come to each other's aid when necessary. Occasionally they had fallings out with one another, and they had small wars with each other. But there was really no central government to these Phoenician empires. In fact, the idea itself of a Phoenician empire is kind of a contradiction. It wasn't really an imperial government at all. It was just a kind of promise to help each other out if there was ever a major conflict. Okay? And as I said, later on, the conflict really came between those city-states around the western Mediterranean that were founded by Phoenicia with those established by Greece and then later Rome itself. In one particular city-state was the major rival to Rome, and that was Carthage. Carthage was founded in sort of northern part of the Horn of Africa here, or this small Horn of Africa, what we call Tunisia today. Carthage. Carthage comes from the Phoenician Kartadash, simply new town. Okay. It was founded around 814, and it grew very rapidly after that, making it one of the largest cities in the Mediterranean world and therefore the world. It was the most powerful navy in the Mediterranean by around the year 200 BCE. As a result of that, this will become the dominant power in the Western Mediterranean, and only until the Romans are able to develop a significantly powerful navy will Carthage be challenged, and eventually the Romans will surpass the Carthaginians. But it will take 3 very long, very brutal wars known as the Punic Wars. In Latin, the word for Phoenician is puny, and therefore they call them the Punic Wars. Eventually the Romans will supersede and defeat the Carthaginians. But at the same time, it should be mentioned that the Carthaginians had a very wide spread to their empire. It is rumored that they sailed as far away as the west coast of Africa. In other words, they sailed out into the Atlantic Ocean through the Straits of Gibraltar, and perhaps in order to acquire certain precious raw materials to southern England, to southwestern England, to the tin mines of Cornwall. So, how much of that is true? It's very, very hard to document any of these sorts of things. The records that are left from the Carthaginians are scant because they are, in the end, defeated by the Romans. And in ancient history, even to some extent as it is today, the history of a given time period is written by the victors, and not those who came up with the short end of the stick, as did the Carthaginians. On that note, Thank you very much for listening, and we will find our next installment in the ancient Israelite kingdom. Thank you.